Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sport. I'm your host, Xylon, and I'm joined by Dr. David Lipman. David, I've got a medical question for you. What is sarcopenia? Firstly, is that how you say it?
That's exactly how you say it. So most of these answers lie in the Latin, sarco being of the muscle, penia being low, so it's low muscle mass. So you end up with this, like classically sarcopenia happens over, as we age, although there is, certainly if you do the strength work, you can prevent it. Interestingly, recently there's been a thought or a discussion around powerpenia, which is like loss of power, because as we lose muscle fibers, or as we lose muscle, as we age, we disproportionately lose our fast twitch muscle fibers, our type 2 muscle fibers. So there's some thoughts that you should be trying to maintain those by that stimulus. So, doing power-based activities, so moving quickly, not just moving heavy, or indeed both, because the heavy stuff, truly heavy lifting, will help maintain type 2 muscle fibers, but certainly moving fast and that ability, if you think about like mortality and morbidity, falls is a really big aspect of mortality and morbidity. So like if you fall as an elderly person, your chances of, your health consequences are significant there, and your chances of dying go up quite a bit. Now, that's probably because people who are healthy don't fall, not just because the fall impairs your health. But the point being here, the ability to move quickly and, say, catch yourself on that step or produce the power to catch yourself, those sort of things are important. So it's important to maintain that. Then there's the aspect of, if we think about how we train power, usually quick movements, so things like jumping, etc., like that can help. Those forces can really help maintain bone mass as well. So now we're talking about maintenance of bone density as well as prevention of falls. So a sort of dual approach to preventing, falls and their consequences. So super important. And then there's also an acknowledgement pretty recently of what we call sarcopenic obesity, which is people who are both obese and low muscle mass, which is like a real concern because that's metabolically an absolute nightmare. So some interesting movements in the field at the moment.
I'm going to have to find more difficult questions for you. I see the glee on your face when I ask you something and you immediately know the answer and you're like, I can rattle off about 10 minutes worth of content here with this, man. But is it true
isn't that the goal? Isn't that the goal? Give me a nice underarm so I can hit the home run out the park?
Exactly. But listeners can't know that, man. But is it true that like starting in your 30s or 40s, we lose about 1% of muscle mass per year, and after about 50, it accelerates, but obviously stuff like strength training and that can slow that down?
Yeah, that's the prevailing thought. I think, so I'm drafting an article for my newsletter, and I have been for a while, on this exact thing about these thoughts around like, how do we, like, what we've seen historically is that, and another example, maybe let's use a different example that is sort of more what listeners would be used to illustrate the point. Historically, we've said, your best Ironman triathlons are when you're 30-something years old, right? And then Christian and Gustav came along, the Norwegians, and they transitioned really early and then decimated everybody. I don't think their best years are going to be when they're in their late 30s like everybody else. I think that was a product of when people transitioned up. So what I'm saying there is we make a physiological assumption or inference based on what we've observed, but what we've observed is slanted by something else. So what does that mean for this loss of muscle mass? Historically, gym culture, if you think about what was a gym in the 70s and 80s, that was bodybuilding, right? And then we got to sort of aerobics, which again isn't really strength training. There's aspects of strength in it, but
I don't know what happened in your countries, but I remember in the 90s, those morning 7 a.m. TV aerobic shows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. They were on in Australia. Yeah, they were there in Australia as well. And then we kind of had this lull in gym culture for a while. Not a lot was sort of happening. And then in and around 2007, we had a sort of boom as a result of CrossFit. And then CrossFit helped bring gym culture mainstream. Certainly brought the barbell back into commercial gyms, brought a lot of sort of calisthenic movements back into there and gymnastics movements into gyms. And then we sort of transitioned from there into more aesthetic-based gym culture where a lot of more women were involved, not just as a result of CrossFit. There was certainly a push there. But if you think about our mother's generations, like there wasn't a lot of training there. My mother started training sort of late in the piece, thanks to some of nudging from me. But like in her generation, it's not very common. They sort of picked it up later. Whereas in our generation, a lot of the women really started strength training a lot earlier or sort of maintained that. And now in younger generations, I go to the gym in the very rare times I go to a commercial gym. I guess I do sort of go to one now, but it's a bit different. But like proper commercial gyms, and you see a lot of young women there and girls, and that's awesome to see. So what I'm getting at here is what we've observed historically is this decrease in muscle mass, and I think that's fair to say if you do absolutely nothing. But I honestly don't believe that to like I've seen my father put on muscle mass post 60, not lose it, and get stronger post 60 because he started training. So I think there's certainly probably a normal distribution. And if you're on the excessively muscled end of that, you probably can't do much to maintain that, right? Arnold Schwarzenegger probably couldn't maintain where you're at. But I think if you're in a normal distribution, I think doing strength training will help you maintain quite a bit of it.
What I'm hearing you saying is I should do nothing until I'm 50 and then I'll start then. And then proportionately, exponentially, I will start getting so much stronger. Thank you, man. Thanks for giving me that free card. I'll do nothing for the next 10 years. That's what I heard, right?
No, it's not what you heard. It's one thing I would say, and the reason that isn't quite right is because maintenance is much easier than gaining. Right. And you certainly can regain. We talked about muscle memory previously on this podcast and that concept, and there's more and more data coming out about this. So certainly retraining is easier than the initial training, but maintenance is also a lot easier. So for you to say maintain strength like gains, you don't actually need to do that much. So to get strength gains, you might need to be training 2-3 times a week, depending on how advanced you are. But to maintain those same gains, it may only need once a week or something like that. So what I'm getting at here is like the best thing you could do is get as strong and as powerful and all those things as possible, and then maintain that over time. Given that, similar to a marathon plan, perhaps like we have to build in failures, right? You're going to be traveling, or you're going to be sick, or you're going to, get injured, or you're going to whatever. So we have to build in redundancy into that plan. So get as strong and as powerful and all those things as you can while you can, and then maintain it as much as possible.
By the way, we are supported by Precision Fuel and Hydration on this podcast. And coming up later on, we are going to talk to Dr. Sam Shepherd, who is the head of sports science and precision, the head of sports science at Precision Fuel and Hydration. He's going to come talk to us about something very interesting. We are going to talk about crewing because they've just come back from Western States where they supported, I think they had something like 7 out of the top 10 athletes there, which is unbelievable. And we are seeing very, very small margins now between the winners. So crewing is becoming increasingly more important. So we're going to talk to Sam about how they approach it, how they tackle it, how they set up for it. I'm so here for that, man. If you are looking for fuel, good news for you. We've got a discount code for you. What's that percentage?
It is 15% off your first order. So with the code OPB 2025. Or you can follow, there's links in our show notes, both to just their generic website or indeed a fuel planner, or to book a call. And so all of those will have our code applied for the first time order there.
Perfect. I'm getting back into training, and it's so interesting what you were saying there, that maintenance is much better, because I obviously haven't really cycled. I haven't run for almost 10 months now with my back surgery, etc.
That's not true. You've been cycling the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but that's what I'm about to talk on. Getting back on the trainer for 30 minutes at a time, once a week, twice a week, feels like hell. Wow, when I raise my heart rate, it goes up there very quickly. And once it gets up there, it hurts. And I'm like, who am I? I don't even recognize this body, man. But I wanted to ask you something else, nerve related. I was at a coffee shop today and a friend of mine was asking how I am doing. And generally, I've been doing really well the last few weeks. I feel like I've turned a corner and the nerve pain is less and less and less. It's still there, but it's not as severe as it was. But the moment I start talking about it and I tell her about it, the pain goes from, let's say there was a 0 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 pain, it goes from that to a 5, 6 out of 10, just because I'm talking about it. Firstly, is that the brain going, oh, that's right, we need to remember this pain? And secondly, how do you unlearn that?
It's because you're thinking about it. It's not because you're talking about it. It's like, don't think of the pink elephant. So like it's the same sort of thing. You're not aware of it, so you're doing other things.
I was
right?
really trying to think of a green elephant there, but that elephant was
no,
pink.
You can't exactly. And this is the whole point: is when we bring attention to things, we sort of they become, I guess, I don't know how to put it, but like remembering that pain is effectively an emotion. Now, again, pain physicians and people and pain specialists may argue that point, and please don't at me, but like pain is not nociception. So nociception is what we think of as pain, which is I've stood on a thumbnail or I've stood on a nail or I've whatever, I cut myself, there is a nociceptive stimuli. You then interpret that based on those sensations as pain. This is why when you rub it, it changes that stimulus and then it changes the experience of pain, right? So that the nerve reception is what we call nociception, and then your interpretation of that is pain. So pain is more complex than just there is damage or there is not damage or there is, something like that. So for you, part of that is going to be around brain space and stress and all those things. I'm sure that it was also bad because you're in a stress state. Like we talked offline before, like you're super stressed at the moment. And so that's going to be part of it as well. That's going to drive it as well. We talk, incessantly. And if listeners take nothing away from this whole issue around your pain, it's that pain is a biopsychosocial phenomenon, right? And the psychosocial aspects of your life at the moment are causing issues with your pain. And that's okay.
I certainly noticed that as well. In addition to feeling the pain when talking about it / thinking about it, I've also had an incredibly stressful time, got a lot on my plate with work and travel. And like when I feel that stress, the pain also increases significantly. But enough about me. What's going on with you? You are still in the mountains in France. Have you been getting out on the trails?
Yep, down in the dungeon now. Well, not dungeon, my office, which is also the gym. As you can see, there's a treadmill back there for those who are watching. Mate, it's been good. I have been trying to explore new trails and went into sort of a peak yesterday. It was really nice up there. So it's just nice to get out and do time in nature. It's training, but it's also exploring. It's just a little bit different. It's not, I have to do a run. Which of my standard routes am I going to do, and all those things. So it's been nice to do that. I know Dusan Zabrodsky, one of our listeners, would be happy to hear that. He was suggesting a little while ago to break my funk in running to get some trail running in. So I'm sure he was, sort of part of what I'm describing is what he was thinking about as well.
We are supported on this podcast by Stride Power Meters. A big thank you to them. Are you using the power meters while running on the trails, and is it different to road?
Yeah, I'm using them. I use them on everything. I think they travel with me. I mean, the nice thing is you can leave them on your shoes, travel with them, take the charger. I mean, you may or may not need it. They last for quite a while. I've been really surprised by how long the battery life is on them. I traveled with them. I use them on trail. I used them for Lavredo actually last year at some point and went through I was about mid shin deep and I was really worried about it. I was like, this thing's not going to last here. I went through about 6 or 7 streams and I was like, oof, okay, well, that's the end of the Stride, and it lived. So I know the guys at Stride were surprised when they heard that from me. It's certainly not made to be immersed repeatedly, but it is not sensitive to water. It's probably water resistant, not waterproof, if you understand the difference there. I don't know what they would say about that, but that's my take on this. It certainly held up for me, which is great. It's been interesting for me because the concept behind it is that it gives you this sort of objective measure of the work you're doing. And yesterday, particularly, we got this big hill. We talked about me, trying to get a KOM up it. I was trying to go up it yesterday, more like zone 2, sort of easy stuff. I didn't want to go too hard at it because I wanted to go harder later in the week. And I just go off RPE. But the pace is then irrelevant, right? Because your pace, you're going uphill on a relatively steep thing and it's a bit technical. So it's like, okay, how are we doing here? But looking at my power is right around where I'd be for a zone 2 run on the treadmill. It's like there or thereabouts. So I'm like, that's really interesting that they can do that while I'm hiking uphill. They've got that sort of calibration, right, between the hiking and running. So I was like, oh, that's actually surprisingly helpful on trail as well, particularly for people who are newer. Again, all this tech, right, heart rate monitor, whatever you want to talk about, power meters, bikes, running, all of it, GPS watches, it is not about becoming reliant. It is about better feedback so that you can dial in your feeling. Right, so I have the feeling on the trail already. Now I'm calibrating that and looking at this power meter going, oh, that's really helpful and accurate. But if I'm dealing with Xylon, who's not used to hiking those steep trails, because that's a very European thing, these really steep trails you've got to hike. If I'm telling you to go like zone 2, it's like, hey, you can use this power meter. That'll help you as well to give you another thing to know that it's not too hard, right? So that's kind of how I would think about using it in those contexts.
Oh, very interesting. By the way, if you'd like to check them out, we do have a code in the show notes down below. That is a code directly related to this podcast, 1% Better. So if you do want to check out Stride, please go there via that code.
Let's get to we also flash that up on our screen, don't we? We've been doing this. We've been flashing banners for our sponsors up on the screen. For those who are watching, please, you can see those banners flash up. So I was trying to give you some kudos for doing that as well, Xylon. There's more and more editing happening with this podcast. So thank you for all your efforts there, mate.
You're welcome. Carrying you as always. Talking about watching on video, we are on YouTube now as well. Find us on YouTube. 1% Better Hidden Stories in Sport. Let's get to some community shout outs. We heard from John Burchett Sharp. He said, Team provision as a service, a fantastic idea for all parties who get involved with collaborative mindsets. Best of luck to Colleen and the team going forward. And that is related to Colleen Quigley, who we had on here to talk about Team Meridia, her new running program, which is super cool, a running collective. He also said, I listened to the podcast while running. It came up on YouTube. So cool, man. Thank you, John, for getting in touch.
He listened to it running, then got on YouTube to comment. Like real commitment. Really appreciate that. So again, I'm sure there's a subset of people, because we keep talking about commenting on Spotify or whatever. You can certainly do that. You can also now, for those who are on Apple or something like that, you can certainly comment on YouTube, and we check all our comments. So please feel free to do that and give us a watch and a listen and all the above there. So we now are available to other people who are not on Spotify for video as well as comments.
Double shout out to you then, John. That is heavy. That is a heavy lift. Thank you. And we appreciate you. What is Spencer Louderbeck, one of our top 2 best listeners on this podcast, been up to? He's been trolling you on the socials.
Well, I think I don't care about being trolled on social, whatever. What I'm getting at is like we've either succeeded in our Jedi mind trick or conditioned listeners like him well enough, and Lustar, our other top listener, around these sound effects. I mentioned my newsletter on social, and he's like, I can hear the papers rustling now. It's like, that's Pavlov's dogs. We got you. We have got you well and truly. So glad to hear it's working. You wait until we're going to, do something with our sponsors where we have a sound for the sponsor, and then we're going to play that, and then you're going to have to go buy a bunch of their stuff. Like that's the long-term plan here from the evil corporate gods.
Conditioning. I love that. Listen, before Dr. Sam Shepard gets here, let's have a look at what's been happening in the world. I saw that Tracksmith has launched a women's marathon team. Now, this seems to be becoming more and more common in running.
Yeah, I mean, so go back and listen to the Colleen Quigley episode. It's a couple of weeks back now. She talked a little bit about this. So historically, teams have basically been about shoe brands and a coach, right? So it's like, I'm a Nike athlete, therefore I can go to these 3 coaches and be part of those squads and then run as part of that team. I think increasingly brands are trying, or non-running shoe brands, or non-shoe brands are trying to create teams as well to sort of support people where they don't fit in, similar to what Meridia is doing, although slightly different because they are a team, or similar to Colleen's sponsor herself, like Lululemon, where they don't have a team and they're decentralized and all those things. So this is really cool. This looks like it's focused specifically, again, on women. And again, back to the Colleen Quigley episode, we sort of talk a bit about that. And then also looks to be focused on the US trial. So this feels a little bit like what Bandit did a couple of years ago. It was just before the Olympics where they did the unsponsored project. So instead of an athlete turning up to the US Olympic trials wearing, say, Nike gear because that's what they own, they could be supported by Bandit as an unsponsored athlete, as a signal to the industry, like, I'm here, come get me. And also they're not giving, say, Nike or whoever a sort of free advertising that they paid for, whereas Bandit gave them this stuff. So it helped Bandit, but it also helps them signal to the industry, which I think was a really cool idea. So this feels a little bit like that. I just think this is a cool idea. I think it's great to see it. I mean, Tracksmith is a good brand. It's sort of high-end apparel. So hoping that they, sort of picking, like trying to build this team a little bit more and going from there.
Let's see. Keep an eye on how this evolves because it's also happening in trail running, like you've alluded to many times before. And, it's on the up and running. So let's see what the sport will look like in 3, 4, 5 years' time. Man, have you seen this? We've talked about Grand Slam on this podcast a lot. For regular listeners will know it's a track meet that was started by Michael Johnson. They had their first couple of meets this year. I'm hearing athletes complaining on social, going public, that they haven't been paid yet.
Yeah, this sort of dropped probably, by the time this goes out, it'll be a couple of weeks ago now. I'm waiting for an update on this. I was sort of hoping it would evolve a little bit more before we talked about it. But at this stage, kind of where we're at is there's reports of staff being fired around financial stuff. Obviously, they canceled the LA meet partially for financial reasons. They dropped the second, like the longer version, the 5K out of the long distance. It was what they call the long distance. dropped the 5K and saved some money as a result of that. I'm not sure if it was purely a money decision, but certainly that helped them. Obviously, Philadelphia was 2 days, and we talked about scheduling being a bigger role there. Certainly, you then obviously save some money, but you also lose some money because you don't have ticket sales on that third day. So I guess where we're at the moment is that there's about reportedly 13 million outstanding to the athletes. And Gabby Thomas commented on a social post the other day, she's like, "Hey, please pay me," which is not a great sign.
Yeah.
Especially because she was one of the faces of it, so it's not ideal. But the article I read on this, they sort of asked for comments from Grand Slam, and Grand Slam said to them, at this time, all agents who've sent the appropriate paperwork have been issued appearance fee payments for Kingston, which was their first meet. And our plan is to make payments for Kingston prize money before the end of July, and the remaining payments due by the end of September, which includes honouring the LA appearance fees. So I think it's good that they're going to pay the LA appearance fees because they cancel that meet. You're not going to pay prize money because no one won anything. So it's fair enough. And to be very clear and fair to Grand Slam track, it's pretty common practice for you to wait or for meets to not pay out straight away. So they generally wait on drug testing. Now,
That's what I was going to ask. Yes.
so they often went on drug testing before they pay out, because we've spoken before about somebody who sort of lost to a drug cheat and then went to chase that money up, and it sort of didn't come back or whatever. But I guess you try not to pay out if someone's failed a drug test. So it's a pretty, I mean, there's a cynical way to look at this as well, which is it delays the time, but whatever. Point being, some of this is probably out of the ordinary. Some of this is probably not out of the ordinary, but we've been in startups, you and I, and funding is always a challenge, and it's always a lot more stressful, and it's always a little bit of the duck who's on the top. It looks like all fine, and underneath it's kicking madly. So this also doesn't surprise me.
Let's see where this goes. Really positive to hear that they still will pay appearance fees for an event that didn't happen. That bodes very well for their future, but this is not good PR that they've been receiving the last couple of weeks around this. So let's see where it goes. But yeah, really, really tough to start something from scratch. I wanted to ask you about nerd clusters. Why are we seeing them everywhere at the moment? These are little, not just pink, but all colored sort of sweets that you get, candy that you get.
Yeah, nerd classes went. Basically, what happened was a bunch of TikTokers started talking about how nerd classes are great for running fuel. This, it's kind of
Disdain
reinvented.
in your voice. A bunch of TikTokers.
Yeah, I mean, just it's reinventing the wheel and recreating the wheel. Candy is a very reasonable way to do this. There's nothing special about nerd clusters. Maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. I've never had one. Fine, go for it. Eat whatever you want. Candy, snakes, or jelly babies, or gummy bears. Whatever. Nerds, whatever you want. Take it. I don't care. So candy is basically sugar, right? Plus a couple of things. And sugar is basically carbohydrates is what we're looking for. It's just very similar to a insert your gel of choice, Precision, etc., or anything like that. So in terms of sucrose, so sucrose is half glucose, half fructose. Generally, when you have generally people are using maltodextrin, companies using maltodextrin instead of glucose because it is less sweet. Somehow, I don't understand that, and it is two glucose molecules bound together. So yes, you can use these, you can use candy, and famously Courtney Dauwalter often talks about Jolly Ranchers and those sort of things, even though she's sponsored by the feed. So there's that aspect of it. It's yes, it is just carbohydrates. At higher intakes, once you're getting to 90 grams an hour or more, you need to start considering glucose to fructose ratios. In which case, candy is probably not a great answer because it's hard to understand that stuff. Whereas sports nutrition brands will have what their ratios are. It's usually 1.1 is to 1.08 is often what they use. It's it doesn't really matter. The ratios are technical. There's arguments and all sorts of stuff. But point is, sports nutrition is sort of engineered that for you, whereas non-sports nutrition hasn't. Now, when you're using candy, it may or may not be more convenient. So where is it more convenient? Hey, I'm doing a cross America, the transcontinental race, and I don't want to have to carry 45 million gels. Cool. You can use candy, stop at the gas stations and get candy. And you're going to candy's ubiquitous in gas stations, right? So in those contexts, it's super easy, right? Similarly, when I'm trail running in the Alps and there's huts, I'll stop and get whatever, cake or something like that. It's fine, right? It's all carbohydrates or fuel or whatever. Where it's less helpful is that it's not so easy to carry that stuff.
Mm.
Like, how are you going to carry a bunch of nerd classes? So you can carry a bag of them, like, okay, fine, or you put them in a Ziploc bag or something like that. Like, it just gets a little bit complicated. So I would think about that. But yeah, you can use candy if you want. I tend to prefer sports nutrition because it's a little bit more measured, but easy to understand. But yeah, you certainly can do that.
So you've been seeing it pop off on social everywhere. It's been coming across your feeds a lot.
I've seen people talking about it. I haven't seen these people. Haven't. I'm not in the radius or in the ecosystem of the people who are actually talking about this sort of stuff. I don't follow these sort of running influencer on. I'm not even on TikTok, but I certainly don't follow them on Instagram either. So like, it doesn't that hasn't come into my stratosphere. But I follow a bunch of people who aggregate sort of running trends and those sort of things, and they've been talking about this a lot.
There's something else that you and I have been planning to talk about, and we've pushed it back episode after episode when we can't find time for it, but we finally have found time for it now. I've been meaning to ask you. You often notice an athlete taking part and you see their face, and then you see the flag they're representing, and you're like, that doesn't add up to me. I'm guessing that person wasn't born in that country. So often athletes do
What are you
switch.
saying, mate? What are you talking about here? You're in like very delicate territories, Island. What are you saying, mate?
Well, let's use an example. I was watching Diamond League in Eugene, and I see an athlete who is very obviously Kenyan. I'm like, you were born in Kenya, and then the flag pops up, and she's racing for Bahrain. So, athletes switching allegiances to represent.
What do Kenyan athletes look like, mate? As opposed to Bahrainian athletes.
I am not gonna take that bet. I'm gonna leave. I think I've ventured to I'm still in safe territory, so I'm just gonna stop there.
No, okay. I'll stop putting your feet to the fire, mate. No, so this is not new. So we mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about that exact athlete who moved to I believe it was Bahrain when she was 15, which is really interesting because that's less common. Going when you're 15, like you've either had a parent or something like that that's gone. And again, I don't want to make assumptions about what Kenya is or isn't, but I don't know if there's a lot of migration from Kenya to Bahrain for work reasons that isn't running, right, or sport related. There is also a reality in which these athletes transition when they're already good, right? 18, 20, like then you're there. But I mean, maybe she was talent ID'd at 15 and the Bahrainians just grabbed her. So like, awesome. It's changed her life, no doubt, right? Whatever that is, and given her access and those sort of things. And again, there is a reason you'd want to leave Kenya as a runner. The reason is if I go to Bahrain, I'm going to be picked every time. I don't have to stress about it. If I'm in Kenya, I have to run trials and do well, right? So like same thing. If I'm a 100-meter runner from the USA or Jamaica and I'm getting offered a spot in pretty much anywhere else in the world, I'm probably going to walk onto that team versus geez, I'm going to have to perform really well in these trials just to make it, right? So I get it, right? Opportunity, just like in business, you may leave one company to go to another company because there's better opportunity there. Like that is similar thing here. Now we feel funny about it when it's country allegiance because like we're born into this. But I mean, I've moved country multiple times, not for work reasons, but like I have done. So yeah, I mean, this is interesting because this has been a real trend in different sports, but it's been highlighted recently in track and field. So Jamaican athletes specifically are shifting allegiances to Turkey at the moment. So there's reports that Olympic shot put bronze medalist Reginda Campbell, discus gold medalist Roji Stoner, and Roji, I don't know, Roje, sorry, and then Jaden Hibbett, known for his world record breaking triple jump, are all changing allegiances to from Jamaica to Turkey, with a $500,000 signing bonus to make the switch, as well as financial support and six-figure bonuses for podium finishes. Right, so
Wow.
they go from basically they're taking a huge payday, even if it's just once off, because they may get all of that stuff or similar to that in Jamaica, but certainly at least $500,000 to just change allegiances pretty quickly. Plus, then they take a probably longer term. There's probably some road to a Turkish passport. Now, that may be something they do or do not want. I don't know, but it's up to them. But interestingly, Wayne Pinnock, the Olympic and World Championship silver medalist in the long jump, has also been targeted, but he's yet to finalize the switch. And then Favour Afili, a Nigerian sprinter, is reportedly switching her allegiance to amid conflict with Nigeria. So now this becomes a bargaining tool as well. So if I don't like what you're doing there, I'm going to shift, right? So this is a part of an aggressive recruitment by Turkey's sports ministry to strengthen its medal prospects in the 2028 LA Olympics, which is really interesting. So I started looking into what this requires. So according to World Athletics, athletes who choose to change their national allegiance must have a mandatory 3-year waiting period, unless waived by both countries involved there. So now there becomes a thing of like Jamaica or Nigeria or whoever says that we're not going to waive you, so you have to wait 3 years, and that's super reasonable, right? Having said that, they could also be paid and then waive them. So why would Turkey not pay Jamaica or Nigeria and say we'll give you 250,000 to waive this athlete, right? Because if the athlete's doing it anyway, it's like, well, we may as well. So we'll see here what happens. It's really interesting, but they aren't even the
It shouldn't
first.
really be a surprise because countries, yeah, are operating like professional teams and corporations. But why not? Because when athletes represent them at the highest level of world championships and Olympic games, it's an advert for your country, just the way you would represent any other brand, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah. I mean, we would have no issues if this was the NBA. It's just a different sport. And, of course, a franchise is not a country, and that's why we're funny about it. It's because of countries, and that's a strong identification and allegiance. So I get it, and I get why people would be funny about this. But, it's not uncommon in other sport, and we'll get to that in a second. But these aren't even the first Jamaican athletes to switch nationalities. So sprinters Jack Ali Harvey and Emery Zafir Barnes represented Turkey and made the switch in 2015. So
Did they achieve anything? Never heard of them. I mean, I'd imagine the moment they switch, the moment you stop drinking Jamaican water, all the talent disappears, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, they probably made the teams easier, but I don't know if they actually listen. Usain Bolt was not going to switch, so you're not getting the top, like often not getting the top tier. Now that obviously with this money, maybe it's a bit different because all the guys I mentioned before, those field athletes, they are all medalists in the Olympics. So yeah. So other athletes who did the same were sprint legend Marlene Otis, who switched to represent Slovenia in 2002. Sharika Williams, Brandon Simpson, Andrew Fisher, and Kamali Brown, who moved to Bahrain as well. So super interesting. I found an article with a story, and I'd heard nothing about this, and this was really interesting. When I was Googling this and looking this up, this is from August 2024, and I did not know this was the case. And this is the thing that really piqued my interest when I said to you, we have to talk about this. So Bahrain naturalizes athletes pretty regularly, right? So we were talking about Turkey before, but Bahrain's been doing this for a while. We talked about a 15-year-old before. So apparently World Athletics said that Bahrain had to be restricted, or had been restricted, to a maximum of 10 athletes in track and field events in Paris in the Olympics, which wasn't announced at the time. And they have the same restriction at next year's Tokyo World Champs, or this year's Tokyo World Champs. So this is because the Bahrain Athletics Association admitted to a charge of conducting itself in relation to doping negligently and or recklessly and or so as to prejudice the interests of world athletics or bring the sport and athletics into disrepute. So in effect, Bahrain said we behaved badly with respect to doping, so therefore they were restricted by the number of athletes that they were allowed to field.
I'm not sure how countries qualify, but 10 seems like a low number to me. So 10 in total in track and field at the Olympics. That seems like a very small number to me.
Men's and women's. I mean, listen, you can say that their grand total was going to be 0 until they naturalized all these athletes, right?
Yeah.
But now it's 10. But this followed an investigation into allegations that 2 athletes had used blood transfusions at the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, and the Bahrain Athletics Association having engaged a coach who was under doping-related ban from World Athletics. Right? So this is because of previous sort of reports. But then, interestingly, Bahrain agreed to not recruit any foreign athletes until the 2027 as well from World Athletics. So there's obviously some stuff here where it's a bit funny. And then Bahrain is also committed to fund a talent academy to develop local athletes and set up, a new national anti-doping body. So, but there's also some discussions around athletes feeling uncomfortable with some of the way they're being treated and what's being asked of them there. So again, if I'm going to recruit an athlete, I want that athlete to succeed. I want to set them up for success. But now, like, how gray zone do I want to be there? So it's really interesting. And I don't want to suggest Bahrain's doing that, but there's some, like, go read the article in the show notes. It's really, like, interesting here. So, but there's others. This happens in other sports as well, right? So you highlighted this as something to talk about post Olympics back last year with Matthew Richardson from Australia defecting to England. So he won 2 silvers and a bronze in the track cycling in Paris for Australia. But he's born in England and moved to Australia at age 9. But he has potentially a 2-year non-compete. And this is really interesting because there is a bunch in track cycling especially there's a bunch of intellectual property now. So now it's like garden leave
Mm.
from a business, right? That's very common in the world, because it's like, well, we've spent all this time, on X that is going to help you and developed it for you. Now you're going to take that with you, that technology or whatever else.
That's what I found interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And then the Lions Tour is currently happening in rugby. This is big discussions here. I mean, there's lots of smack talk from Australian announcers and that sort of stuff over the PA that I know you enjoyed, where they announce people from where they were born and that sort of stuff. But I mean, I mean, it's interesting with the Lions. I mean, James Lowe obviously played for the Māori All Blacks, and Mac Hansen played for the Australian under-20s. Now they're playing for the Lions. So James Lowe actually played against the Lions, and now he's playing for them. And Jack Dempsey's an Australian, played for Australia in the Rugby World Cup, now plays for Scotland in the next Rugby World Cup. So he played for Australia in 2019, he played for Scotland in 2023. And this big story that's come across a lot of rugby airwaves is Fabian Holland, who's just played his first game for the All Blacks, played really well. He's actually a Dutch-born guy, so I know his family really well. I coach his little brother. I met Fabian. So he moved from the Netherlands to New Zealand to pursue an All Black dream and a rugby dream when he was 16. And is now...
And this guy's surname is Holland.
Yes.
That shouldn't be allowed.
He's a big Dutchie. Like, it's... like echt Nederlander. So no, it's great for Fabian and that, but it's an interesting thing. Is like, now are we exporting talent? What does that look like? I ran the rugby academy that he came through. Obviously, after he'd left, his brother was still in it. It's like, is this success for us? We've created a great rugby player or played a small role in it. So is that successful for us, or should we be trying to grow Dutch rugby players who are in-country Dutch rugby players? And is this very inspiring for Dutch rugby players? They see they can now compete on the world stage or not, right? So it's a really interesting thing here. But Regulation 8, as part of World Rugby, this is how you decide or how you can become eligible. So it requires that a player meet at least one of three criteria. So it's be born in that country, have one parent or grandparent from that country, which is how Mac Hansen, etc., qualify, or complete 5 years consecutive residency immediately before representative duty. So this is how Fabian qualified, right? He was there from when he was 16. Or do 10 years of cumulative residency preceding the time of selection. Right, so live
10 years.
But that's cumulative. So you could be in and out of that country doing all sorts of other stuff, right? So you might have this strikes me as something for people who are perhaps playing in the Japanese league and then maybe doing US NLR as well. So you don't have to have consecutive 5 years block. You play both seasons, but then you've done enough residency in Japan to qualify for Japan. But
10 years is a long time in pro sports.
Yeah, I mean, that means you probably didn't make it as an 18, 17-year-old. You started playing sort of in Japan and then sort of qualify as a result of that. But World Rugby also changed the eligibility laws to enable eligible players to represent a second country following a 3-year stand down. So this happened a little while ago where you have a 3-year stand down. This is Jack Dempsey as an example that I gave before. And so they have to have 3 years following their last representative thing. So previous to this, what would happen is people would get one cap to get captured, and then they wouldn't be able to play for another country, which was pretty bad. Now, Rugby League does this slightly differently. Rugby League talks about first tier and second tier. So if you've previously played for a first tier country, you can play for a second tier country. It's not a worry, but you can't go the other way, which I think makes more sense in this context. So you can't be stolen. So the All Blacks can't steal a Samoan player who's played for Samoa. But if he's Samoan or of Samoan heritage or could play for Samoa and has had a couple of games for the All Blacks, he can go play for Samoa to help strengthen those teams that are second tier, which I think is, I think that's great.
So they have a ranking for the teams to decide which tier you are.
Yeah, basically in rugby. I mean, rugby league's not hard. Like, it's pretty classic. Yeah. Like, it's pretty clear.
I have a question for you. Like, I'm trying to imagine what this is like representing another country. For me, I've only ever lived in South Africa. Now, all my work is in Europe. I travel a lot. My colleagues are multinational. I'm exposed to a lot of cultures, but I cannot imagine representing another country. I can't say I'd never live in another country. Right now, I'd say I'd never live in another country, but I'm old enough and experienced enough to know that life changes and it throws circumstances at you. But you've lived in multiple countries. Like, can you imagine representing another country?
Well, I mean, I got the opportunity to represent Australia at one point, like not at a sort of high level. It was just, anyway, we won't talk about exactly the circumstance because it's hilarious, but not worth sharing.
Was that from the NAC, National Clowning Association, NCA?
No, mate, it wasn't, but thank you. It was actually for running, but it was weird context and, not sort of, I wasn't ever really going to be like top tier Australian team. I wasn't Olympics or world champs or anything, but So certainly could have done that and wouldn't have felt funny representing Australia. The context was wrong for me at the time, so I decided not to do it. But what I'm getting at there is I was grown up in South Africa and was very, for a long time, considered myself South African, moved to Australia and sort of that transition. No, I moved when I was young. I was like 9, 10 years old. So maybe that's why. And most of the time at that stage, or even to this day, most of my life has been in Australia, right? 20 years in Australia. So you could say, okay, it's a volume thing. But now that I've left Australia, I feel increasingly less Australian. And parts of what I thought made me unique and individual in Australia are actually South African things that are very classically South African. And I'm starting to realize that now, having left Australia and seeing more South Africans in Europe and London and the Netherlands. So I'm also different. I don't love being identified by a label. I like to just be Dave. And that's, you see these people on, LinkedIn or social media or whatever else will go like, I'm X whatever company. I'm like, I'm not that. I'm just Dave. Right. So maybe I'm different here, but I certainly, if I think about my sports supportership, right, who am I a fan of? Who do I support? I certainly have aspects of every country I've lived in. I've always, we talked about Niels Larosse on a previous episode around, this Dutch kid. And it's like, I kind of interested in him and support him because I lived in the Netherlands. And so I sort of support them. So same with women's football. I'll support the Dutch to some degree as well. So there's certainly aspects of that. Always got an eye on South Africa, always got an eye on Australia, always got an eye on the Netherlands, even though now I live in London and support zero of the English teams and probably will never. But I mean, I can't support them in cricket. I certainly can't support them in rugby. So anyway, but the point is there. So maybe that's it. Maybe I'm the wrong person to answer. But I also think if, say, the Netherlands for some reason called me and said, would you compete for us in, I don't know what, I'd certainly consider it because it's a cool opportunity. Regardless of that, I was coaching a Dutch national team. I was coaching the under 17 national team, under 18 national team in rugby. And one of the things I was very clear on was I'm going to do as much of this in Dutch as I can. And I'm going to learn the anthem and sing it with them and do all those things to be very respectful to that culture. So certainly, and then learned a bunch of history around it as well, partially for theming and storytelling, but partially also because of respect. So I think it's more complicated than people think. But I'm also acknowledging that I'm not the average person. I'm a bit different in how I just approach things.
It's just such an interesting conversation. Yeah, I remember recently, a couple of years ago, South African triathlete Richard Murray, his fiance, a girlfriend, a wife, she's a Dutch professional triathlete, and they were spending increasingly more time in Holland. And he saw, the support that she gets from the Dutch Federation. They offered that to him because the South African Triathlete Association just couldn't come close to offering him that support, and he switched right towards the end of his career there. But I don't think it makes a difference to how you feel. You watch his vlogs and he comes home to his parents in South Africa, often spends considerable time here. I think you still feel a certain way, but yeah, you have to look after yourself. But it's just such an interesting conversation. By the way, if you find any of this fascinating and you'd like to get in touch with us, you can DM us on Instagram, 1% Better Pod. That's our handle. You can also email us. The email is down in the show notes below. And you recently heard us adding a second sponsor onto this podcast. That's thanks to you. Thanks to every single person that is helping us along. And if you would like to continue helping us, you can do so by subscribing to the podcast or share this episode with a friend. David, let's get to Sam. Sam previously joined us on episode 52. That was way back on the 28th of February to talk about sodium hyperhydration. We've got him back here. Dr. Sam Shepherd is the head of sports science at Precision Fuel and Hydration and co-director and sports nutritionist at Total Endurance Nutrition. Prior to joining the team, he was working as a lecturer and reader at Liverpool John Moores University for 12 years. He completed his Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science at the University of Birmingham, followed by his Masters of Human Nutrition and Metabolism at the University of Aberdeen. He then returned to the University of Birmingham to complete his PhD in Exercise Metabolism. After all of this, he completed his postgraduate certificate of Learning and Teaching at Liverpool John Moores University. Sam specializes in exercise metabolism, focusing particularly on the mechanisms governing carbohydrates and fat metabolism, as well as how exercise and nutrition can be manipulated to improve both health and performance outcomes. He has published more than 60 peer-reviewed research articles and supervised 12 PhD students to completion. In addition to all of this, if you didn't think he was busy enough, Sam is also a sports nutritionist, has completed 8 times Ironman races, including the World Championships in Kona. This includes winning the Mallorca 140.6 long distance triathlon in 2021 and finishing Ironman Mallorca in 8:45:22. He also competed at the Ironman 70.3 World Championships in Taupo, New Zealand. I was going to ask, with Ironman's new qualification criteria, if Sam would still qualify for the World Champs. And then I just saw those times there, and I'm like, oh, I'd look pretty stupid asking that question.
Yeah, no wonder you started giggling, mate. Silly questions get silly answers, mate. But Sam, you're joining us today to discuss crewing at Western States. We teased this back on the sodium hyperhydration episode. We teased it the last couple of weeks. I'm super excited about this, but the margins of this stuff are getting smaller and smaller, right? Like there's no question about this. In 2024, there was only 51 minutes separating third and 10th in the women's race in Western States, and 16 seconds between the second and third men. This year, the top 3 women were 13 minutes apart, and top 10 were only 94 minutes apart, which is 1% difference between the top 3 and 9% between the top 10, which is wild. And then the top three men this year were 8 minutes apart, and the top 10 were 2 hours and 11 minutes apart. This is equivalent to 0.9% difference for the top 3 and 15% for the top 10. So we're talking tiny margins here. 8 minutes is whatever. So I guess with that as context, that's why you've joined us. Tell us about your role specifically at Western States. We know what you do for the company, but like, what were you doing at Western States?
Yeah, so we as a sports science team went out to support the athletes who we are sponsoring. But essentially, we were on the ground. We were distributed across their different crews. So we were supporting each of the different athletes that we kind of support from a product and sponsorship perspective. And so, I guess the main things that we were working with them was in the lead up to the race. We were obviously, going through their plans, tweaking those, making changes. And that, we're talking there in the months and weeks leading up to the race. And then on the ground, dialing those in and ultimately trying to ensure that they follow that as best as possible come the day of the race and being involved in that process.
And so you're talking plans. Let's get concrete here. So you're talking carbs, fluid, and electrolytes. Basically, is my take here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we've got a number of athletes that we've supported, and even over the years at Western States now. So some of them have very, clear plans. They know exactly what they're going to be doing. Dan Jones, for example, didn't tweak his plan too much from last year because it's a solid foundation to work from. Yes, there were some small changes, but nothing significant. Equally, there was athletes starting for the first time there. So we had a few newbies, let's say, like Peter Frano, for example. That was his first time racing. So he's starting from scratch. He'd not even done a 100-miler before doing Western States. So this was completely new to him. So there's a lot more time and effort goes into creating that plan alongside one of the sports science team at Precision. But essentially it's about dialing in the carbs, the fluid, the sodium, how that's going to look through the day. Is it going to, fluctuate during the day depending on the temperature, the dynamics of the race, equally the part of the course and they're on, essentially, and then what access they have to crew checkpoints, but also uncrewed checkpoints where they can pick up water, ice, etc. as well. So that's the main task leading into the race. In fact, is really dialing those plans in, and then when we're on the ground in Olympic Valley in the few days beforehand, it's about meeting up with the athletes and the rest of their crews. And Western States is probably a little bit unique in some respects, that you tend to have quite big crews, or at least we compare that to UTMB, where you can only actually have one person interacting with the athlete in that aid station. This is a little bit different, where, and I'm sure you've seen some of the footage, sometimes it gets a little bit congested and a bit of a scrum, which is quite interesting as well. So it's about managing that and really thinking about what we're going to do at each checkpoint leading into the race. Who's going to be responsible, let's say, for managing that checkpoint. And again, a little bit unique to Western States is you tend to have 2 crews here, because you just don't have time, at least for the faster athletes, to get from one crewed checkpoint to the next. So you kind of have to leapfrog between the two. to kind of manage that through the day, at least for the faster guys anyway.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So let's talk about Peter Freno as an example. Now, you mentioned him. This is perfect because he's both stepping up to a 100-mile distance, but also now dealing with Western States, which is its own unique aspect. So I guess, how do you go about that? Because I think there's a lot of learning here for people from an environmental standpoint, but also from a stepping up distance standpoint, because the strategy you use for 50 miles or even 50 Ks is not what you use for 100 miles. It just can't be. And then again, just touching on the environmental aspects.
Yeah, so any start point really is like, what's he done in his previous races, and that's always the initial conversation, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then we start to look at what's the course profile, and critically, where are the checkpoints where we can provide assistance as sports scientists and crew, and where are the checkpoints that we can't provide assistance, but there's an opportunity to mainly pick up fluid, refill bottles, etc. So you start to build that plan out largely based on those touch points, and looking at what, in terms of carbohydrate, someone might have done in the past. So if someone's done 80 or 90 grams of carbs an hour, how are we going to extrapolate that over, from 100k now over to 100 miles, and build that plan out accordingly. One of the simplest approaches, and this isn't necessarily specific to Peter, but one of the simplest approaches we take with athletes is ensuring that they go, right, you're starting with, three 90-gram gels, some fluid, some sodium. The key thing for me as a sports scientist is, when I see you in 3 hours' time, you've got rid of all that essentially, and then we start to replenish in the checkpoints, and you kind of follow that pattern. It makes it a little bit easier at Western States because you see athletes fairly regularly, so they're always collecting new nutrition, whether that's sodium, fluid, carbs from you. But the key thing I always try and stress to them is, like, at this point when I see you, I want to make sure that you've essentially got rid of what we'd planned to. And if you haven't, that's fine, but at least we can then discuss that maybe, or think about how we might work around that as the race goes on.
And so, I was going to say, just if you could touch on the environmental aspects of Western States, because I know this is an area where you have specific expertise, and I think people would be interested to hear, like, say this race was happening in winter versus summer, right? Same race, winter versus summer. What are the big differences there? I mean, everyone knows fluid and electrolytes. Okay, fine, but what else?
So I mean, it's an interesting one because the guys are starting off at sort of 5 a.m. in the morning at altitude, so it's naturally a bit cooler. And essentially, it just gets hotter and hotter through the days. It's a very simple way to look at it. There's some parts of the race where you are descending, and then you're deep in sort of canyons, let's say, where it's the heat becomes quite intense, very humid. There was also periods where it's a lot more open and exposed again, where it's hot. But there's also parts of the race where you have a little bit of cover, so then naturally it's cooler. What we try to do by design, and also as it's transpired this year, worked quite well, is that we're asking athletes to increase the amount of fluid that they are consuming during the race to try and match those changes in temperature and humidity primarily. So early on in the race, they might only be consuming maybe 500 or 600 mils per hour to the first checkpoint at Duncan Canyon. They're sort of 3 hours 45 or so in at that point. Probably then it's starting to heat up, and we're starting to ask them to, and by design again, plan for them to increase the amount of fluid that they're consuming, and also electrolytes to kind of manage their temperature, manage their hydration as the temperature increases. Particularly, I think, from Duncan Canyon. So that's, for those that don't know, that's the first quite crude checkpoint that you see athletes. From that point up to Forest Hill, which is probably sort of the 7.5, 8 hour time point into the race, about 62 miles or 100k, that can be quite a hot part of the day, and where you're really starting to experience that change in temperature. So making sure that we account for that from a fluid hydration perspective, but we also need to think about that from a carb perspective as well, as the temperature rises. And I think a big part of what we try to talk to athletes about here is thinking about the fact that during the early stages of the race, it's going to be relatively easy to consume high amounts of carbs, but the trick is, how are you going to continue that level of carbohydrate intake as it gets deeper and deeper into the race, not just from a tolerance in terms of quantity, but also alongside the temperature, which makes that, much more difficult to do. Under those circumstances, we're obviously working quite hard to cool the body, but we need to consider the fact that that's going to draw blood away from the gut. It's going to make it a little bit trickier to absorb that amount of carbohydrate. So how are we going to overcome that? Do we need to take on a little bit more during those later stages, and maintaining blood glucose concentrations, and also then able to better maintain the effort deeper into the race as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, heat is a bit of a wicked problem because, as you've mentioned, you now have less blood flow to the gut because you're cooling. But heat also increases carbohydrate oxidation. Is that at the same intensities? Is that correct? So you now end up with this sort of wicked problem where you need more, but it's also harder to absorb it. And you're also at higher risks of GI distress. So you have this kind of perpetuating wicked cycle of potential catastrophic failure, right? Either GI upset or not enough carbs.
And that's it. It's such a fine balance to the guys at the front of the race are constantly, trying to consider. And don't get me wrong, for most of them, it's not plain sailing. You can practice these things in training, but you're never really going to know how it transpires on the day. And that's part of our role, I suppose, as crew, is to try and consider. You can even tell when someone comes into a checkpoint just by their facial sort of expression. A lot of the time is how are they doing from a cooling and hydration perspective, but how are they also doing from a fueling perspective. So we need to consider, they might come in and say, actually, I've only had half the carbs here. What are we actually going to do now to try and overcome that? Do we need to increase them? But equally, we're going into a hot part of the day or a hot part of the race where it becomes trickier. So we need to, it's such a fine balance to find. And yes, it's on the athletes a lot of the time, but we can support from a crew perspective as well.
Sam, I think you guys had 7 out of the top 10 in the men's field being precision supported athletes. Do you think that's a coincidence, or do you think like your crewing and this level of detail and support that you gave to the athletes played a significant role?
I can't take credit for 7. I think we had 5 out of 9, the top 9. So I'll better correct you there just before anyone has a go. But I suppose from our perspective, we'd like to think that we're supporting the athletes as best we can, and we spend a lot of time, as a group discussing this. We've been there a few years now, so we know what the challenges are of the environment, of the day, and we've got some experience in how to overcome those. But also, I think particularly this year, I think this was the 3rd year where we had a decent group on the ground crewing different athletes. And I think being a part of those crews is important. Firstly, we've built those relationships with athletes. So I think that, I hope at least, that they trust us and trust our judgment. So if in the build-up where we're developing their nutrition plans, their hydration plans, we're taking a lot of time, spending a lot of time talking to athletes to really dial those in, considering what they're going to face on the day in terms of the environment and potentially the speed that they're being required to run at, as we saw this year. So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think the team at Precision, like the sports science team, we do spend an awful lot of time thinking about these things to make sure that our athletes are as prepared as possible. And as I say, that's in the weeks and the months, and then also on the day from a crew perspective leading into the race and during the race as well.
I had a question about logistics. So historically, the picture of Western States in everyone's head is Scott Jurek or someone with holes cut in their shirt, 2 hand bottles, right? The classic view of Western States is 2 hand bottles. It's like the only ultra in the world where you see people with like 2 hand bottles and nothing else, or a belt. We are increasing, or at least this year was very apparent. So like in the last couple of years, it's kind of been a men versus women thing. Women have used more packs, men haven't. This year, like even a lot of the men were wearing packs, and we saw that amazing pack you guys made for Chris, or you had with Chris. So like, I guess, what do you think is driving the increased use of packs? Is it to do with the materials being better, or is it to do with increased nutrition emphasis and therefore required carrying requirements, or what do you think is happening?
I think there's probably some technological advancements there. So like you've highlighted the pack that we worked on with Chris, and that's that was specific to him and his needs, where he was going to carry fluid, where he was going to carry his fuel. If you've not seen, I urge you to go and check out the some of the work that's gone on behind the scenes about doing that, because it was a big project, but it's obviously paid dividends with his result. But the key thing there for him that he wanted was an area in that pack where he could slot some ice in at each checkpoint on his back, so that he could help with cooling essentially. So I think we're recognizing that using a pack is an opportunity, not just for increasing or capacity to carry fluid and fuel, but also like how can we use that from a cooling perspective. Now, that we also like support an athlete, Dan Jones, who carries a pack for the first part and then sheds it and doesn't carry a pack after that point. So there is still nuance in that. There are still individuals who prefer the two handhelds is the strategy that they go for. But I do think, people are recognizing the importance on being able to carry a little bit more fluid. The materials that are being used to create those packs is improving, and probably going to support the cooling as well. When we pour water on those materials, as an opportunity to, the materials mean that they're holding that water a little bit longer, which will help with cooling. And if we refer back to Chris, in fact, one of his residing quotes that always sits with me, and we talked about it with him at the training weekend before, about 4 weeks before the race, and he kind of reiterated that point in the days leading up to the race, was essentially it's about staying wet for as long as you can during that race, and that again was the reason he was using his arm sleeves, for example. He had the pack that was going to hold some ice and hold some water as well, and that was his strategy. So I think that's probably a logistics idea in terms of being able to carry a little bit more fluid, a bit more fuel, but also the cooling aspect which we know is so important during Western States. It's going to support with that as well.
How meticulous is the planning at the aid stations within your crew? Because we were watching videos around and it just looks like chaos. There's just people everywhere. Does each member of the team know exactly what they're doing, who they're giving what to? And also another question, does Andy Blow, the founder of Precision Fuel Hydration's previous Formula One experience come into this?
It probably does, although he's never talked to us about those pit stops, but that's what they're turning into for some athletes. I can speak for Dan Jones, for example, who I was crewing together with Johnny Ty, who's the co-founder of Precision. We were very pre-planned in what roles we had when Dan arrived at the aid station, and Dan's the one of those people who likes to be in and out very quickly, continue running as fast as he can, essentially. You do see other people who take a little bit more time, and that it's not to say they're not at the front of the race. That's just their approach to the aid station as well. But for us, with Dan, we can use him as an example. I was kind of in charge of the cooling aspect. So when he came in, we'd be putting an ice bandana on him. So that was my job. And then I'd be cooling with water and ice in various places around his body. Johnny would be replacing what was his hydration, but mainly his fuel that he was carrying in his belt. So Dan would come into the aid station. He'd take things out of his belt while I was putting the ice bandana on. Johnny would then replace that fuel basically in the belt and give him his handhelds, and off he goes. So I think we timed one of them. It was about 20 seconds, one of the checkpoints, and another one was 27 seconds. So we were happy with that level of pit stop, and I think Dan appreciates that. But as I said, some people prefer more methodical. They take their time, they catch their breath through the checkpoints as well. But we definitely try to have specific roles, and that was just when there was two of us. If there was a couple more of us, because for example Dan's parents were there supporting him as well, and we met up at a couple of checkpoints, we just assign additional roles. Maybe they could help with the cooling, or offer a can of Coke, for example, if that's what he wanted to have at that point, as an alternative. So we try to be quite dialed with who's doing what, otherwise it turns into a bit of a mess and everyone's trying to get involved, and that's where it breaks down a little bit, and athletes then forget to take a handheld with them and they're out the aid station, or that's where things go wrong.
And is this a process of the days leading in, you're all sitting in a room, this is what I'm going to take at each aid station, break that all up, set it all aside. This is the allotment for each aid station. We know what's going in there, and therefore, Johnny's going to do this. I'm going to do this. Dan knows that. Everyone's clear, and then they go because that's sort of very pit stoppy, right? You're very F1 pit stop, and like that's where, like you just mentioned, 20 seconds. I saw you guys have put some stuff out on social. I can't remember it exactly, but I think some of them, had an average of about 30 seconds for the whole day through aid stations. Like that is insane, particularly when you compare that to some other races, right? And you don't want to be rushed, but you don't want to be wasting time either, right? We talked about, it's 0.9% between first and third. So is that the sort of process that goes in? Is that what planning looks like ahead of time?
Yeah, so you're correct that it's very methodical in the days leading up to the race. So again, speaking about Dan, because that's who I was working with on the ground, we'd meet up a couple of days before, essentially talk through, we'd grouped his nutrition for each checkpoint and what he's going to start with into bags. So we know, and as I said before, we have two crews. So one will go to one checkpoint, one will go to the next one, and then we'll leapfrog. So both crew A and crew B know which checkpoints they need to be at. They know what nutrition Dan wants to pick up at that checkpoint. Also, the potential alternatives that he might want as well. So, can of Coke is often something that we'll have open, particularly for the later checkpoints. And essentially, we'll discuss who's going to do what. So Dan knows exactly what to expect when he arrives at that aid station. There's no, who's putting my ice bandana on, who's putting fuel in which pockets. He'll even say, I want, my gels in the back of my belt. I want any additional fluid in the front of my belt. So he knows exactly where it's going. And then when he's racing, he knows exactly where to look for it when he's out the aid station. So it's those little details, I think, that make the difference. And it's all in the days leading up to the race where we're just trying to dial that in really and making sure that the athletes know exactly what to expect when they arrive at the checkpoint. So it's not rushed, although it seems sometimes rushed. It's not. It's pre-planned and methodical in what we're doing.
I mean, you've spoken to us a little bit already, but I think given Emily's approach, which was mentioned on this podcast, which is very, let's call it adaptable, how much is it so athlete specific, or is it generally like broad plan with adaptation that happens within it, right? So you talked about Dan already. You talked about his plan had been similar from year to year. He kind of has a good handle on this, but you also talked about athletes coming in and sort of have that 1,000-mile stare, and you're like, geez, I probably missed some nutrition here. So how much is planned versus adaptable? And I mean, it's a hard question to answer, I guess, and probably a bad one as a result, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, most of the athletes that we work with are dialed enough that they have the plan, and it doesn't deviate too much from that unless something has gone terribly wrong. And thankfully, in the last couple of years, things haven't gone terribly wrong for our athletes. Now, there's also, unfortunately, we had Martina, who we were supporting, Martina Milnarzic. She's a new athlete to us, so this was going to be her first 100 miler, and she didn't. She DNF'd in the end. So that was sad to see. And I think on reflection, there could have been opportunities where we or other members of the crew could have intervened and maybe provided some advice. But it's difficult sometimes when you have only just started working with the athlete necessarily to know them inside out, like we do with some of the athletes who we've worked with for a little while longer. That being said, I think the way we try to approach it is the early part of the race is, for most people, pretty dialed, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they'll follow that to the T. Later into the race, you just need to give a couple more options. So I talked about a can of Coke being open as one option. Often you'll just have some salt pills out on your hand if there's a spare pair of hands, so that an athlete can go, actually, I probably could do with an extra couple there, depending on how they're feeling. Additional water to hand. And you see that, I would say, not just within us, but also across other crews as well for other athletes. That the deeper into the race, you kind of need to give some more options, because as we know, anyone who's done any type of endurance event, the later you get into these types of things, you have some idea how you're going to feel, but you don't know exactly what you're going to need. And there needs to be some flexibility in what you're going to do at that point.
Yeah, because things start going wrong. Like the issues start coming up later, right? So you have to both adapt to those issues, plus you have flavor fatigue, plus you have heat, plus you have all these other factors that change it. So that makes a ton of sense that it's more scripted early and then more adaptable later. So I guess I think to take away from here, what I'd love is, do you see any mistakes that are commonly made at aid stations? Do you think like you could give advice here to someone crewing that you think, hey, this is some good advice here?
Yeah, probably the main thing is to have a plan that the athlete is happy with and you are happy with in the days beforehand, and don't deviate from that. But also, take your time through the aid station. Like I said, a lot of these feel like they look like they're rushed. They're not rushed, they're planned. And try to be methodical in what you're doing. That's the main thing that I would take away from that, because as an athlete, I'm sure you can recognize this, as an athlete, if you come into an aid station, you want to know exactly what to expect, and as long as it follows that and you head out, you've got all your nutrition, you've got all your fluid, you've been cooled down a bit, then you're probably happy to, you're in a good place. You think that's gone well. So not panicking is probably the best way to achieve that, and having that pre-planned strategy dialed in, and just following that to the T, really.
Sam, last question from me. Is there something that surprised you, something that stood out for you, a memory that you always take away from this race, from this particular event for yourself?
I mean, it's hard to go beyond having first, second, fourth, and fifth finishes this year as precision athletes. I mean, that's unbelievable. And we had 5 in the top 10 last year, which we didn't think we'd be able to replicate, and we have. So that's pretty incredible. I think the main thing for me, and if we go back to the different approaches to crewing and for various athletes, one of the things that really stuck out to me, not this year but last year when Jim Walmsley was racing, was how slow he was through his checkpoints. So he would come in, he's ahead of the field, he would come in, he would sit down, it'd be very relaxed, almost too relaxed, I would, for my mind. He'd probably change his shoes, maybe a change of t-shirt. The chasers would probably have caught him and gone out ahead of him from that checkpoint. And then, he gets to the next checkpoint first. So he's clearly running faster than everyone else. And that's what I mean. It's very individual. And he knew exactly the plan. And that was always the plan. And he followed it. And that's what kind of worked for him. That was probably the biggest surprise. And my first experience, I was like, what is this guy doing, But it clearly works. So there you go.
You've got more physiological margin when you're Jim, right? And it's probably more of an interval style with him. He probably goes a little bit too hard intentionally between aid sessions, a little harder than some of the other guys and girls do, so that he then sits down and takes that time, right? So he's also probably, I think Jim specifically, given what I know about Jim, is he was probably influenced heavily by a more UTMB-like European approach, given he'd spent time living in France to try and prep for UTMB last year and the year prior. So that all makes sense. So yeah, that's interesting. I saw somebody with a kiddie pool full of ice this year at one of the aid stations. I don't know if you saw that. I think I won't mention who I think it was, but I think do you have a take on that? I thought maybe it's a bit too much of a physiological shock, but then I was like, well, it's also wet and cold, so like maybe it helps.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little bit too much of a physiological shock, and that's one thing that we. Interesting you brought that up. That's one thing that we tried to avoid doing this year with Dan in particular and other athletes, is being too, let's say, over exuberant with the ice and the cooling at certain checkpoints. Because I distinctly remember last year when we were crewing a couple of athletes, we'd sent them out and they were almost like shivering from the shock. And okay, it's short-lived, but you don't need that additional stress on the body at that. You're 100k into a 100-mile race. You don't need that additional stress to overcome. So I think that's a little bit overkill. There might be a point to it if core temperatures just way too high and they need to be bringing that back down. Maybe that's a strategy that they might want to use. But I think in the midst of a race, it's probably a little bit too much of a shock, and being careful with the cooling, being not being over exuberant is probably the way to describe it. Is probably a better strategy.
Yeah, I'd go with mindful. Let's be mindful with what we're doing here. So that's been great, Sam. The insights are great. We really appreciate you being willing to share those, of course. Appreciate the support of both you and the company. So I'm also happy that you won the loud shirt off today. Xylon couldn't compete. So it is good to see. But really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back at some point. So you're actually not our first return guest. unfortunately. You narrowly missed that. We had, 2 weeks ago, the time this will go out, we had Robbie Ketchell join us, but he was also our first ever guest, so it made some sense to have him back first. So, but we appreciate you. Thank you so much, Sam.
No worries. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of that insight. Thanks.
There we go. That is Sam Shepherd. I think he's our second returning guest.
Yes, yep. We had Robbie Ketchell as our first returning guest, and Sam is our second. So awesome to be building a community and support around us where we can call on these people to get insights. So yeah, really appreciate Sam's time and precision making him available, and of course supporting the podcast in that way as well. So, but it's awesome. Anything you took away from that you found to be particularly interesting?
Yeah, I just love those insights. I mean, the precision around it in terms of who does what, planning it, that all makes sense to me, because when I was watching videos on social through those aid stations, everything is just chaotic, and the athlete is obviously under pressure as well. So as organized and as meticulous as you are, the easier it makes things, and yeah, what was interesting was just how far out the planning starts, because I was like, do you start with a blank page here? But obviously you don't. He was saying you look at what they've done in other events in the past and where they're at now and what the goals are, and then you work accordingly.
Yeah, you kind of have to. Like, you have to start somewhere, right? So you start from the guidelines, and then, I mean, these are all, like, they're supporting elite endurance athletes. So, like, these people have all raced before. So you take what's been happening and then you adjust, right? So that would look different in winter to summer, it would look different at different races and all that stuff. So it's kind of start from the guidelines, dial into yourself, and then have a sort of base case for yourself, and then tweak based on that.
Yeah, it was just so, having followed the event, watched the live streams, saw the videos on social, and then getting insight from someone who was actually there in it, it was so interesting. So thank you once again to Sam. Before we go, quick, someone in the doctor's office this week, hopefully not another death?
No, well, I mean, yeah, you can. Like, Noah Lolesio plays fly half or 10 for Australia. They played Fiji over the weekend, and he took a really bad tackle. It wasn't actually that bad at the time; didn't look so bad, but he stayed down.
I saw that.
Yeah, like, he had this neck injury, went off, and oftentimes with that stuff, it's precautionary. But he ended up getting surgery on it. I've heard, and I'm not sure it's true, he had a fusion of some of the bones in his neck, some of the vertebrae in his neck, which would be horrible. It's a horrible outcome for him, and it's pretty. He had whiplash, but like, it's not super. I mean, it's somewhat innocuous in its injury, so I just feel really sorry for him. Like, he's a young guy, and that's happened. Like, it's terrible. So
is that pretty much career ending? If they did a fusion, that's career ending for a rugby player or not?
Maybe if you're a front rower, like Stephen Kitsoff, we talked about a little while ago.
That's
so
for
him, maybe.
Yeah.
But this guy doesn't. He's not a front rower, so his neck isn't a weapon, and his neck isn't under stress regularly. Whereas someone in the front row it is. So yeah, there's positional differences there. But he's going to have an extended period of time off. So yeah, it's unfortunate. He'll miss the Lions. He misses playing the Lions.
Before we go, what are we watching this weekend?
I guess more Tour de France, mate. Like, getting interesting. So yeah, more and more of that. Maybe a bit of Lions and stuff. What about you?
I'm working at a pro cycling training camp in Italy, performance camp, so I won't be watching much, but we'll definitely be stealing a few minutes here and there to glance the Tour de France. I will also be on the way to the Tour de France, so yeah, keep up to date with that. But not much TV time, unfortunately, just basking in the Tuscan sun, man.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you, mate. Thanks for your help on this week's episode.
Appreciate you too. Thanks for putting that together, and we will catch you on the next one.